too. On the fourth day, they started on their journey higher on the hills. As they climbed higher and higher, the scenes and landscapes they saw were found to be simply enchanting. On the right, the sacred Ganga was rushing downhill in all her glory, and on the left, high rocky hills, full of foliage and trees, presented at once a thrilling and absorbing sight. The very air there was charged with the divine presence of Ram. The fair of hills and valleys, the varied hued sky in which the white fleecy clouds assumed fantastic shapes, the snow-capped mountains hundreds of miles away up, dazzling in the rays of the sun as though they were covered with sheets of silver. All these constituted indeed an imposing sight. Oh, the charm of these scenes, O Ram! Poor Ramadass cannot find adequate words to describe the grandeur, the beauty, the wonderful glory of these sights that met his bewildering gaze. As he walked on, he drank deeper and deeper of the splendor of Ram's infinity and was lost in the intoxication of it all. O Ram, thy kindness to thy slave is really unbounded. From day to day, both Ramkinkar and Ramadass walked on at a high speed. Ramadass felt no fatigue, no pain, no discomfort of any kind. He was as fresh as ever. It was all due to Ram's grace, whose name was always on his lips. Thus mountain after mountain was traversed, and as they climbed on, grander and newer scenes presented themselves before their wondering sight. It was a journey in the land of enchantment. It was all a bewitching dream full of the glory and greatness of Ram. There Ram exhibits his marvelous powers. He is a mighty conjurer. Vision after vision dances and flits before your eyes, and unconsciously you fall under the subtle charm and spell of this great magician. You forget what you are and where are you. You are simply absorbed and lost in the surroundings, like a wisp of smoke in a hurricane. Ramadass was walking at high speed. Nay, he was veritably flying. Even the difficult ascents were scaled in no time. Most of the time, he was unconscious of his body. His mind was entirely merged in Ram, who alone appeared to him in those enchanting scenes. Higher and higher climbed the indefatigable pilgrims. Ramkinkar, who had a heavy bundle to carry, complained of Ramadass' running speed, since he would not keep pace with him. But Ramadass was not his own master. Ram was his master. At a certain place, they missed each other, causing anxiety to both. But, however, Ram brought them together at a stage called Rudraprayag. Thousands of pilgrims are every year ascending these hills, and during this season, from March to June, a regular stream of people is going up and coming down the hills. All the pilgrims, sadhus and others whom Ramadass met on the way were very kind to him. Some rich merchants from cities like Bombay were very solicitous. Because Ram is kind, all are kind, and Ram is in all. The mountains are peopled by hill tribes, a fair, complexioned, and well built race. They live by cultivation and cattle and goat breeding. Naturally, their lives and ways are simple. Their faith in God is very great. Ram, Ram is always on their lips. If you talk to them, they tell you with a glow of pride that they are the descendants of the rishis that lived in those hills. Their clothing is wholly made of wool. Males wear long woolen coats and drawers and a black cap, and women rough blankets in place of saris. These blankets are prepared there out of the wool yielded by the sheep they tend. So the footsteps and clothing, the two essentials of life, are the produce of their own labor. Even while walking from place to place, every man and woman carries a quantity of wool which he or she is spinning on the way. They have simple pit looms on which they weave the yarn into cloth. Since their mode of life is free from the baneful touch of modern civilization, they live simple, pure, honest, and pious lives. At different stages of the journey over the hills, under trees or in small huts or caves, are seen sadhus engaged in austerities. To seek their company and remain there forever so small a period is a great privilege. The society of the sadhu is a much needed bath for the mind. The pure atmosphere he creates around him by his meditations is the river in which the mind bathes and is pure of evil thoughts and impressions. Upon these sacred hills are the ashrams of such famous saints as Narada and Agastya Muni. There is also a place called Pandukeshwar where the Pandavas are said to have halted from some time during their journey to Kailash. There is a temple here and some old inscriptions upon plates of copper. The first place visited by Ramadass and Ramkinkar on the heights was Tiruvannamalai. The ascent to this spot was sharp and steep, and it was a plateau surrounded by hills covered with snow. Hence, the cold here was intense. The pilgrims remained here for one day. Then, after descending some distance, another chain of hills was mounted. Here the path was narrow, rugged and dangerous. Frail, rickety bridges had to be crossed. At 3 places, large tracts of snow had to be traversed. On account of the perilous nature of the path, every year many pilgrims are reported to have slipped down the cliffs and been washed away in the rushing torrents of the river, many hundreds of feet below. One instance of a narrow escape may be mentioned here. At a certain stage in the middle of an ascent, Ramadass was sitting on the path awaiting Ramkinkar. This was the edge of a high cliff and the river was flowing far below. The path was very narrow. A girl of about 16 years, full of energy and activity, was coming down on her return journey. It was a sharp descent. Her pace was rapid and the sharp downhill path only accelerated her speed, and in spite of herself, she was running down at uncontrollable velocity. Down, down she came. She was excited, her face was flushed, and she knew she was being drawn down automatically, and it was beyond her power to control herself. Instead of running towards the hillside, she was staggering down to the edge of the path, the very brow of a precipice. Ramadass watched the scene with breathless suspense. He was silently calling upon Ram to save her. Ram alone could and none else. Now she came up to the edge and with a superhuman effort controlled herself. She had came to the very brink. Part of her left foot was out of the edge. O Ram, how terrible a condition! Ram, thy name be glorified. Ramadass looks and sees the girl falling on the path right and across, uttering, Ram, Ram, saved, saved. Ram saved her. She got up, did not wait a minute, but continued her walk further down. Dauntless girl, what a marvelous faith in Ram is thine. The other was the case of an old woman who gave up her body in the basket in which she was being carried by a sturdy mountaineer who was specially engaged for the purpose. At certain stages in the journey, this courier would lower down his burden for relief, and the last time he did so, it happened to be near the place where Ramkinkar and Ramadass were resting on the roadside. The bearer, as usual with him, lowered the basket on a rock and asked the old mother to step out of the basket for some time, but receiving no reply. The hillman peeped into the basket, and a cry of surprise and pain started from him. The poor woman is gone, he exclaimed. O Ram, thy will is down. The walking higher and higher, Ramadass and his kind guide eventually reached Kedarnath. This was indeed a grand place. It was plain land in the midst of high towering mountains covered with snow. The cold here was extremely severe. O Ram, thy kindness to thy slave was so great that thou hadst made him almost proof against cold. Himalayan Journey 3. In Kedarnath, Ramadass performed a most difficult feat. All by Ram's grace, he ascended one of the surrounding high rocks covered with snow. Of course, Ramkinkar followed him. While going up, they had to do so by holding the rough grass that grew on the hill. It was a steep ascent. For nearly half the way, Ramkinkar accompanied him, and then he refused to go higher up with Ramadass, both on account of cold and the danger of slipping down. Meanwhile, Ramadass, who had surrendered himself into the hands of Ram, mounted higher and higher until he reached the summit of the hill and touched its narrow conical peak. As he touched the top, he gave a cry of triumph in the name of Sri Ram. He uttered at the top of his voice, Om Sri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Om Ram. What a glorious being thou art. Now descent was most perilous, and unguarded step or a slight slip meant a headlong fall and certain destruction of the body. However, when Ram guides, where is the fear? What danger cannot be faced boldly? He slowly crept down, nay, slipped down the hill. While doing so, it began to rain white solid globes of snow. He had ascended without any warm clothing, but by Ram's grace he felt neither cold nor fear. At last, Ram brought him safely to the base of the rock. It took 5 hours to accomplish this ascent. The height of the hill might have been over a mile, going to the source of the river Mandakini, which starts at this place, where the snow melts and flows down. He took his bath. The water was, of course, very, very cold. But what cold can affect him when Ram protects? In Kedarnath, there is a temple, some shops and residences, a day stay, and he, on the advice of Ram Kinkar, travelled onwards. After descending for some miles, the pilgrims commenced to walk up another chain of mountains. Higher and higher again they climbed. Again glorious enchanting landscapes and scenes met their eyes. At the foot of a hill they came upon a resting place where there was a small town called Gauri Kund, wherein hot water through a spring is collected. There was also another tank in which the water was yellow in color. From there, he and Ram Kinkar started on their upward journey. Miles and miles of ascents were traversed. The pathway now was not so bad as that which led to Kedarnath. For days and days they walked on and at last neared the place called Badrinath or Badrinarayan. While they are yet about half a mile from the place, they sat down on the path and looked at the Badrinath mountains. The sight was bewitching. To describe the scene, the poor pen of Ramadass is quite inadequate and unfit. As he gazed on, he for a time lost body consciousness and became one with the tall mountains in the midst of which he was sitting. Badrinath is the source of the river Alaknanda. While going up these heights at 3 or 4 places, the pilgrims had to cross wide tracts of snow. He travelled over them with naked feet. These tracts of snow are glaciers. Below the surface of these vast cakes of snow is flowing water in heavy torrents downhill to meet the river below. It is said that many pilgrims, while walking on their surface, have been sucked down by the torrent, some thin layer of snow giving way beneath their feet. The story is current that a wealthy merchant of Bombay, while being carried on a dolly or cradle-like conveyance by 4 strong men, was drowned and lost in the swift current below. Badrinath was reached. It was a flat valley surrounded on all sides by high mountains like Kedarnath, and here stands the temple of Badrinarayan in white marble. At this place also there was a tank containing hot water received from a hot spring running down the hills. All the pilgrims bathed in his tang. The cold was very intense, but Ram was kind and gracious at the same time. So Ramdas did not feel the rigor of the cold very much. He had some difficulty in gaining entrance to the temple for the darshan of Badri Narayana, as there was a heavy rush of pilgrims at the front door, but some sickly people were permitted to get in by a narrow side door at which two pandas or Brahmins were said to watch. He sought entrance here. One of the pandas said, "If you are sick, you can come in." "No, Ramdas is not sick," replied Ramdas. "Well, pretend that you are sick, if you are not," suggested the Pandaji. "Never," returned Ramdas. "He does not want the darshan of Badrinath by telling a lie. It is against the command of Ram." Saying thus, he turned away from the place. But the kind Pandaji at once grasping his hand took him inside the getting him the darshan of Badrinath. Gave him also some prasad. "O Ram, thou art testing thy slave in various ways, remaining in Badrinath for a day." The sadhus started on their return journey. After several days' walk, they came to a place called Ramnagar, whence the railway line starts running southward. In all, the distance travelled over the Himalayas was 400 miles, and the time taken from Hardwar to Ramnagar was 14 days. Ramnagar, as the name suggests, is a blessed place. Charity is the ideal of the people there. Near the railway station, there is a dispensary worked by the Congress volunteers for the benefit of ailing pilgrims. Hundreds of pilgrims are every day receiving aid from this dispensary. Arrangements by well-to-do citizens are made for feeding sadhus and poor pilgrims. The people of the place are kind and hospitable. For his part, Ramdas must say the same with regard to all parts of India wherever he travelled. Ram was uniformly kind to him all his travels, because he had started on his travels at the bidding of Ram alone. At Ramnagar, he and Ramkinkar got into the train proceeding to Madura, which they reached in due time. Here Ramkinkar, who was taken ill, proposed to return to Jhansi. During all the time he was with Ramdas, Ramkinkar was more than a mother to him. He took every care of him. It was all Ram's wish that such a friend should leave him. Accordingly, Ramkinkar left Madura for Jhansi. Ramdas was now alone only for a few minutes, for Ram had another sadhu ready at the Dharmashala, where they were halting to take him up. Madura, Gokul and Brindaban. Madura is a birthplace of that great incarnation, Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna is the veritable personification of love itself. His imperishable name lives still green and in all its pristine glory in the minds of all people in India. The Bhagavad Gita stands unrivaled in the depth of its philosophy, pointing out the one goal which all human endeavor should aim at as the ultimate accomplishment of all life and existence. Madura still remembers vividly the child Krishna and his charmed life, which is proved by the variety of mandirs in the place in which he is worshipped daily in the form of gaudily dressed idols. On the day of Ramadass' arrival at Madura, Ramkinkar being laid up with fever, Ramadass, before he came in touch with the new Sadhuram, went to the city in quest of the holy river Jamuna. Ram, who was ready to offer help to him, now brought him in touch with a Brahmin going towards the river. He came of his own accord towards him and proposed to lead him to the river. Having reached the holy Jamuna, Ramadass first washed his clothes and then descended into the river for a bath. But before doing so, he placed his small lota on one of the stone steps, into which he also put his spectacles. Finishing bath, he was returning to the spot where he had placed the lota, and he was only a moment too late, because a monkey coming up carried off the spectacles. Now without spectacles, he could not clearly see objects at a distance. The Brahmin guide, seeing this, was annoyed, but Ramadass, unperturbed, said it was all Ram's wish, and thought within himself that perhaps Ram meant to restore his failing sight. But the Brahmin would not rest content. He requested two boys standing nearby to run after the monkey for the pair of spectacles. The monkey meanwhile was jumping from one torrent of the temple to the other, closely followed by a number of other monkeys who thought the first one had got some eatable in its grasp. However, in about a quarter of an hour, the boys returned, bringing with them the pair of spectacles in a sound condition. It was, after all, a test of Ram on his humble slave. After visiting some temples of Sri Krishna by the kindness of this Brahmin guide, he proceeded next day to Govardhan in the company of the new Sadhuram. Govardhan was situated at a distance of 40 miles from Madura. They reached this place at midday. Here was the famous hill of Govardhan, which is said to have been lifted up by Sri Krishna and supported on the tip of his little finger to protect the cows and cowherds, his playmates, from the heavy torrents of rain set down by the angry god Indra. But this hill is fast diminishing and has come down almost to the level of the surrounding land. The stones cut out from the hill have been for the most part used in the erection of houses at the place. However, to represent the hill, a piece of rock from it is preserved, enclosed by an iron fence and with a top roof. Upon this rock, pilgrims pour ghee, milk, curds, etc., and offer puja. Even from this rock, bits are knocked off by the pilgrims and carried as mements. After securing food at a dharmashala, Ramadass and the Sadhuram rested for a while in the afternoon. In the evening, both the Sadhuram and he were out on the road going about the town when they heard from a distance the sound of bhajan. Thither Ram led him and the Sadhuram. Shortly after this, they found themselves in a small Ram Mandir, and in front of the images about half a dozen saints were sitting and singing to the accompaniment of cymbals, tambani and mridang, the glorious name of Ram. The words were Har Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. This bhajan was sung repeatedly in a variety of tunes, producing in the atmosphere an electric influence full of peace. In this place, he remained for nearly 4 hours, fully absorbed in the charming sound of Ram's name. Next day, he and his guide started back for Mathura, and after a short stay there, Ramadass, who missed the Sadhuram, proceeded alone to Gokul, lying at a distance of about 5 miles. Gokul is the place where Sri Krishna grew up as a child, played his games and exhibited his extraordinary powers. Here also the blessed Jamuna flows. It was here in this river perhaps that Sri Krishna rode and danced on the hood of the venomous serpent Kaliya. After a day's stay here, he returned to Mathura, whence he proceeded to Vrindavan about 6 miles off. Vrindavan is a very delightful place. Here the same Jamuna flows in all her tameness and purity. There are beautiful natural gardens of neem and other trees on the banks of the river. To sit under their cool shade when the fresh breeze is blowing over the place from the bosom of Mother Jamuna is to enjoy heaven itself. He was charmed with the place and stayed on the banks of the river for a fortnight, made the dry sand his bed and seat for the night, and the shade of the trees a little above his resting place for the day. Moonlit nights here were all bewitching. The very air seemed to be charged with the presence of that love incarnate Sri Krishna, and when soft breezes were blowing, they seemed to be carrying into Ramadass ears the maddening music of Sri Krishna's flute and the silvery sound of the tinkling tinny bells of his blessed dancing feet. Now and again a deep, soft and resonant voice would travel in the air. Radheshyam, Radheshyam. Ramadass lived there in a state of complete ecstasy and rapture. Days passed by unconsciously. The whole stay seemed to be one long drawn, sweet and pleasant dream. At Vrindavan, he visited many Krishna mandirs, of which the Ranganath Mandir is a huge and picturesque structure. It resembles a fortress enclosed by high massive walls. The gateway and interior building and roofs of all made of stone, artistically curved. The command came at last from Ram to quiet. Returning to Mathura, he got into a train directed by the friends of the place. Thank you.